Hello, Aries. This is a forecast for Aries rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Aries, your ruler Mars is moving through the latter degrees of sidereal Gemini in May, and therefore it's moving into its sign of debilitation in Cancer. And so from the 10th of May until the 30th of June, actually, you have this period where your ruler is in its weaker sign. And so what does that mean? Well, Aries, if this is your rising sign, you might actually feel like you need to take a break. Cancer is very much about having some downtime at home. If it's your moon sign, all the same, there is a sense of needing to take a step back from overdoing things, whether it's physically or just mentally, emotionally, kind of pushing yourself too much. Mars in Cancer is not the best time to overreact to things that seem to be on a sort of pause. And but at the same time, it's not the time to do nothing. It's a time to certainly address certain issues especially in your home. Um, for example, Mars in Cancer in the fourth house can, feel a bit like a bull in a china shop in a way. So it's like if you're feeling frustrated, just not being able to get out and do stuff. I mean, that's not very helpful to be sitting and stewing at home and creating more problems than are necessary. So I would say, Aries in May, um, from 10th of May, more especially, I would say this is a good time for you to deal with the issues at home and to get out if you feel that any kind of tension is building up in the home. Um, but before all of that, you still have this exchange between Mars, your ruler, and Mercury, which is still retrograde until mid-May. On the 15th of May, it will station direct. So this is an exchange between your first and third houses, very much about yourself and how you communicate. And so I would be very conscious of how you're communicating throughout this period, and especially really on until the 15th of May, even though Mars will have moved into Cancer at that point, which in a way makes it even more important to be very careful in how you communicate, because you don't want to be burning your bridges at this stage. You don't want to upset anyone unnecessarily. You do need to say what you need to say. Maybe some things need to be said, but you don't want to create any problems that are just adding to the situation. The good news is after all of these kind of more complicated transits, fizzle out in April and May, we have Jupiter settling into your sign, Aries. And so this is a more positive transit for you, and you may feel the sense of breath of fresh air coming in, despite these more heated exchanges that might be going on also. And so Jupiter will be in your sign for the next year, in fact, until May 1st of 2024, Aries. So this is definitely one to take advantage of. A sense of buoyancy can come into your life, perhaps propped up by a sense of things opening up for you ahead. You might be making plans, you might be traveling, you might be studying, you might be just broadening your horizons in some way, shape, or form. That is what Jupiter is for you anyway. Travel would be a good one for it, this Jupiter transit, but any kind of higher studies would also fit this mold very well. Jupiter is your ninth and 12th Lord. Now, apart from that, you have to, again, just in May, be mindful of, again, some complex transits, including the Mars and Mercury and all of that. But also the Jupiter and Rahu. So Rahu has been in your sign for over a year. It continues till the end of October. And Jupiter and Rahu both come together on the 27th of May. If you use the mean nodes, it's into the beginning of June if you use the true nodes. But at any rate, till the end of May, you're experiencing this conjunction of Jupiter Rahu, which could show some, ill-conceived advice coming from somewhere, that if you're not mindful of this conjunction, you may be kind of led astray. Now, whether or not that's intentionally or not, that's a different matter. Whether or not it's deliberate, there is this sense of with Jupiter and Rahu that things might not be very clear. And that's especially with Mercury retrograde now as well. So making decisions about anything that's going on at this time, even if you're feeling the need, the urgency with the eclipse and all of that, having just occurred in your sign on April 20th, and until you have that full moon and lunar eclipse in your seventh sign on May 5th, until all of this sort of works its way out. Even though it might feel urgent to make a decision about something, there isn't a lot of clarity forthcoming. So I would be just very patient with this and let it sort of fizzle out, and wait for that sort of Jupiter to kick in a more positive way, and that clarity to become more and more evident, I would say, after the eclipses, the Mercury retrogrades, and all of that. So quite a complex month, May, Aries, in when all is considered. I'll mention as well that Venus moves into your third sign along with Mars until the 10th of May. And then at that stage, that Mars will move on and leave Venus behind in Gemini. Third sign, Gemini, Venus transit can be very enjoyable for sure and social. And I think the potential there for having more social interactions could be there. Again, just be really mindful with communication, because Mercury continues to retrograde until the 15th. As you see here, it stations then on the 15th. And so let me leave it here in Aries. So then the sun moves out of your sign. And so for the first 2 weeks of May as well, until the 15th, you have the sun continuing to move through your sign, which is also a very buoyant and uplifting transit. So that's definitely a time of year for you, Aries, every time it does that from mid-April to mid-May, to really recharge yourself, to rejuvenate. And so when you add this transit of the sun through your sign, and then the subsequent Mars moving through Cancer, it is time for recharging and then taking some time out even by the end of May, as Mars then moves into Cancer. And it will be there all June as well. So I'll talk more about it next month. But I hope that's been of help for now. As always, Aries, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Taurus. This is a forecast for Taurus rising and or moon sign for May 2023. Taurus, Venus has moved through your sign in April, and in May it will move into your second sign, Gemini. And so this is a bit of a shift going on here, and I'll show you this from the beginning of May right up until that full moon and the eclipse in your sixth sign on the 5th of May. Your ruler Venus moving into your second sign, conjoining Mars, which has been in your second sign for a few weeks now, is highlighting obviously values, wealth, family dynamics. And at the same time, because Mercury continues to retrograde until May 15th, exchanging with Mars in the second, there's some give and take that is required here from you, Taurus. So whether this is your rising sign or moon sign, there's some financial issues, perhaps. There's some, issues around saving and spending. Again, give and take that has to happen here. And some complexity for sure. And any kind of communications, could be complex because of a Mercury retrograde in your 12th house. Together with all of these planets in your 12th house, of course. So the best way to express the sun, the North Node, the eclipse in your 12th house, Mercury retrograde, now Jupiter also, as well as Uranus, so many planets emphasizing the 12th house, obviously could show a kind of heightened and exaggerated expenditure. So a better way to express the 12th house would be to let go of things for a time, to maybe actually go away for a time, to go on retreat, to take a sort of longer extended trip away if that were possible. And of course, perhaps that will be one of the things that adds to the expense. So you have to be mindful of that. But it's certainly a better expression of the 12th house to kind of maybe just take a step out of things for a while. 12th house is also about meditation, about letting go and sleep, and just relaxing. And, you can do that in your day-to-day life without spending a penny. So, just meditating daily to help with these transits, kind of just overcome this sense of not knowing what comes next as well. And this lack of clarity, I would say, very much in May, because as for all the signs, there's a lot of lack of clarity here because of, the eclipse, Jupiter meeting with the North Node, the eclipse, Mercury retrograde, so on and so forth. There's just so many things that are not clear right now. So for you, Taurus, I would say it's very much around family and finances and all of those things around home life, especially as well with the sun there in your 12th, until mid-May, when then the sun moves into your sign. So I'll show you that now as well. And so when the sun moves into your sign, obviously this is a time of year, as it is every year from mid-May to mid-June, to really recharge yourself and rejuvenate for the coming year. And so this is a great time to do that. and take full advantage of it. Venus, your ruler, is in the second sign. Mercury at this point from the 15th of May will have station direct. So then you have a nicer situation going on, Taurus, where you have the benefics, Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury on either side of your sign as the sun moves through your sign. So from mid-May, there is a completely different picture forming for you, Taurus. This could be like a very enjoyable situation. Now, even though the benefics are either side and it's sort of hemming you in a way, this is like, you know, being stuck somewhere and actually enjoying that. So it's a much better situation overall. While the sun moves through your sign, the fourth lord, just enjoying some home time, downtime, and enjoyments. I think this could be very beneficial for you. And for you, Taurus, with Mars moving into your third sign, Cancer, you're probably one of the only signs that experience this in such a positive way, because Mars in the third, although in Cancer is debilitated, it's the third house, so it's very much they go hand in hand, Mars in the third. So it actually might take a sting out of Mars in Cancer for you, and actually maybe even give you a sense of impetus to actually go get something you want and express what you need to express. So this could be a very positive transit for just being more active in your everyday life. And because of the other transits that are more positive as well, with Venus and Jupiter either side of your sign, you know, there just could be a very nice and enjoyable experience in May that you then are energized by, I would say, overall. So some very positive aspects and transits going on for the latter part of May for you. The first part of May, the first couple of weeks of May, especially with the Mercury retrograde and the sun in your 12th and all of that, is more complex for sure. So after that, though, it changes completely. So Taurus, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. Hello, Gemini. This is a forecast for Gemini rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Gemini, your ruler Mercury is continuing its retrograde. It is retrograde until May 15th in your 11th sign, exchanging with Mars in your first sign until May 10th, at which point Mars will move out of your first sign, Gemini, into Cancer. So there's a lot of things in flux in May, especially the beginning of May, along with the eclipse that just got triggered in your 11th sign, Aries, and leading to the eclipse in your 5th sign, Libra. So although there are a lot of dynamics going on here, a lot of complexity, a lot of misunderstanding and misinterpretation that could be possible, especially dealing with any kind of planning and dealing with other people in general, there is also a very strong potential for you to be very clear. And I suppose that's what the Mercury-Mars exchange is about more than anything else. It's like you getting clear about your ambitions in life and your engagement with other people. Any kind of social engagement certainly could be complex, though. And so in that case, you're dealing with a lot of people who have their own thing going on. So I would say in that case, if you're dealing with any kind of group dynamics, you know, just be mindful of the complexity here. Mercury continues to retrograde, like I said, until May 15th. So after that point, you know, things can start to settle down and move on after the eclipses have, you know, done their thing. So it's showing a lot of changes that are going on in how you're expressing yourself and how you deal with the group. The sun continues to move through this area also, and Jupiter is just settling in here for the next year. The sun will move in to your 12th sign by mid-May also. So some key shifts going on, which I'll show you here. So the first thing to show you is the full moon and solar eclipse here, or the lunar eclipse, pardon me, after a solar eclipse in your 11th. So it's again highlighting the 5th and 11th. Friendships and children, if you have them, or friendships and your own creative self-expression, and how you blend with the group, how you personally bring your own unique voice into a group dynamic. That's one of the key things about this eclipse season for you, Gemini. So here you see Venus is now moving through your sign as well, and that's a more enjoyable, more positive experience overall. And then, like I said, by the middle of the month, the sun will move into your 12th sign for the following month until mid-June. So as Venus moves through your sign for the whole month, you know, again, enjoyable. The sun moving through your 12th highlights the need to kind of let go of some sort of selfish pursuit here. And so it could leave you feeling a bit, you know, I would say challenged in one way in communicating with other people when combined, especially then with the other things that are going on in your 11th house. And this is more so the case because now Jupiter, which is settling into Aries, is joining Rahu, the North Node, in your 11th house. You know, although Mercury, your ruler, by the 15th of May moves on and moves direct, it's still mixed up with all of this, with the eclipse, with Uranus. All of these things are just complicated in terms of group dynamics. So that's something to be mindful of. And that then could lead to a sort of a sense of not being very clear because the sun, your third lord, is moving into your 12th house from mid-May. And that's the case every year. But this year, added to all of everything else that's going on, it's probably a better time to kind of take a step back and just listen more and try not to be too impatient in what you want to communicate, even though actually that's what might happen. Mercury moving forward now in the sign Aries with Mars in the square in your second sign of speech. This could be like you really want to say something, but then you create problems here, because if you're communicating something that's really harsh or that people are just not ready to hear, Mars in the second sign, Cancer especially, can be very reactive. And so you might find that you're meeting with people who are very defensive and you get defensive and things like that. So again, even though Mercury's moving forward, because of all the eclipses and all of that, and Jupiter meeting with the North Node eclipse, it's just complicated. And so you just have to be mindful of any of these kind of shadow aspects going on in any kind of communications and any kind of interactions with people, especially kind of social engagements and things like that. But having said that, there's a lot of nice things going on. Like I said, with Venus moving through your sign, the sun, though, in your 12th sign is hemmed in between Venus and Jupiter. You know, there's some enjoyable things that could happen to. This could be a very enjoyable time for you as well. So that is the month of May, Gemini. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Cancer. This is a forecast for Cancer rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Cancer, we have a lunar eclipse, an almost full lunar eclipse. It's actually partial, but it's a lunar eclipse in your 4th sign by the 5th of May. So I'll just show you this here. And the lunar eclipse is always a time to, by the 5th of May, I think I said the 4th. So anyway, the lunar eclipse is always a time to find a balance between that and the opposite sign where the sun is, where we have just experienced a solar eclipse in your 10th sign. And because Cancer, these are in two very prominent places in your chart, in the 4th and the 10th, home and work life are in particular activated here. And what does that mean? Eclipses mean change, and that you have to change now, that there is something that's instigated since the solar eclipse. Something has happened since the solar eclipse in your 10th sign of work on April 20th. Something is going to get triggered all the more throughout the summer as planets transit this degree. And I think it's important now around the 5th of May, leading up to the 5th of May especially, to have some downtime at home and to consider what is more important to you in your home life, and, you know, and the work-life balance and all of that. And so just being open to some sort of resolution as well around some issue that might have been triggered for the eclipse in your work space. Because there's definitely some complexities going on here, because while this is happening, Mercury continues to retrograde in your workspace, the 10th house, exchanging with Mars in your 12th. And the 12th house is very much about sacrificing something. So you're having to sacrifice something you're doing, or even like a job you're doing, or there might be some changes that are at least going on in your job, and that, you know, you just need to be mindful of this kind of give and take that has to happen. And whatever you do, let it be more sacrificial in a way, let it be more service orientated. And therefore you don't have to experience it in a way that's more, I would say, having to relinquish something that maybe you don't want to. So it's like, it's almost like purposefully giving something away, or purposefully doing something as a service, even if you just end up doing the same thing you would have done otherwise. But it's just, at least you're not going to feel like it's going to be something that's taken from you or something like that. It's definitely a complicated time, the first couple of weeks of May, especially with the Mercury continuing to retrograde in your 10th house. So I'd be very conscious of communications in general. That is always the case for Mercury, but for you, it is especially because it's your third lord, third and 12th lord. So just being very mindful in sending off that email or whatever it might be, and very mindful in how you're listening right now, because, and in any way, in any kind of professional way, because there definitely could be something that you're missing, or you just misinterpret something, and then you blow it out of proportion, because the other side of that is that Rahu, the North Node, as well as Uranus and the Sun and Jupiter and all of these planets together, creates so much of a sort of intensity in your workspace that you could really, not be seeing the clear picture here. You maybe not having a lot of clarity. And that is because of Mercury and Jupiter, what they're doing with the nodes and all of that. And there isn't a lot of clarity right now, but things will settle down after May. And after that, Jupiter will really get settled into the sign, and you can be more clear about your future direction in terms of work and home life. But really until after Mercury station direct on the 15th. And then, so if I show you that, Mercury station direct on the 15th, and then planets after May move past the North Node Rahu. I think that there can be clarity after that point. In May, it's just there's a lot of a lack of clarity and direction for you because of, again, your 10th house and 10th lord being involved. Now, by the 10th of May, though, there is one positive thing happening in one way, because Mars, which rules this space, is moving into your sign for the rest of May, 10th of May, until the 30th of June, all of June. So this, although it's a sign of debilitation, Cancer, Mars is said to be the best planet for Cancer because it's the 5th and 10th lord. So doing something that's very purposeful, taking action that's very purposeful, if you have children, being very deliberate in what you're doing with them. The downside or the pitfall to Mars in Cancer is that, yes, you feel energized, but then at the same time, you maybe feel like you don't know what to do with the energy, and you feel frustrated or just tetchy and angry. So it's very important to do something with this energy. Mars is not a kind of energy you can just sit on. If you have children, there could be some issues here that you're dealing with them. If you with a boss as well, for example. And so, or it could be a combination of any of those two. So, for example, children represent things like creative expression on your part. So if you want to do something that's, something you would love to do, and your boss is sort of, asking you to do something else, that's a good example of how you might have this kind of frustration build up inside you. So it's important to actually find an expression for this, to do something you love, and at the same time, maybe do something that you have to, that you're asked to. That could be one way of tackling this Mars in your sign. But overall, it is a more beneficial transit for you than other signs, for sure, Cancer. This is a time when you can really feel energized from 10th of May, really right through the rest of May and all of June. Venus is going to be in your 12th sign this whole time. And, this is something obviously that needs to be let go of. The 12th house transits are always that case. But because it's the 4th and the 11th lord, there's some, home dynamic and friendship situation perhaps, or social interaction, or some sort of thing that needs to be ended at this point and maybe just reconsidered in another way. Because together with the Mercury retrograde until the 15th of May, there's a lot of reconsideration going on here overall in terms of many private things in your life as well, not just the public professional side of things, although a lot of the emphasis is there. A lot of it is to do with actually how you're finding a balance or not with your more personal and private relationships. So a complex month for sure, Cancer, and it is for most every sign. But certainly there are some things to look forward to, including that Mars moving into your sign. It's just there's a big shakeup that you have to go through as well until Mars moves, with the exchange between Mars and Mercury, and until Mercury stations direct. So keep an open mind, I would say, the first part of May for sure. And after that, see where the chips fall, and then start to look at how you can make a decision about these things. By the end of May, Jupiter and the North Node Rahu come together by exact degrees. So just be open to not having, good advice perhaps about your professional life and not being really clear about it. And just keep an open mind, I would say, and just allow May to, pan out the way it's going to, and allow the dust to settle in June. And then you can be more clear about how you're going forward, because Jupiter will be in your 10th sign for a year. So professionally, this can be a very beneficial time for you if you can just almost just navigate May in a way that is without overdoing anything, without a sense that you have to do anything actually, or make a decision about anything, if you can. if you don't have to, if you're not forced to. But indeed, that's what might happen for you, Cancer. You might feel like somebody or some situation is forcing your hand. So take your time with it, I would say. Be patient with these eclipses, the Mercury retrograde, the Mars, and all of that, and use it to your advantage. So, Cancer, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Leo. This is a forecast for Leo rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So, Leo, you've just experienced the sun being eclipsed, your ruler, but at the same time, the sun is also exalted. So there is a mixed bag here for sure. There is a sense of strength that you have at this time every year, and that is from mid-April to mid-May as the sun moves through Aries. It's a sign of exaltation. But because this year there was an eclipse and now we have a Mercury retrograde and all of these changes that are happening in your ninth house, there definitely is the potential here, Leo, for you to feel confident in what you're doing, but at the same time to not be 100% sure about how it's all going to pan out, and to be okay with that, to be open to the changes, the unexpected changes, and to then subsequently just ground yourself in what you can do. So a more grounded time might be this moon here opposite the sun on the 5th of May, which is a partial lunar eclipse, almost total, but a very powerful, potent full moon. And it's in your third sign. So it's about taking all of those ninth house activations now and all of those big ideas and all of those, reconsiderations and changing your mind about things and changing what you even fundamentally believe about certain things, and applying them and questioning and looking and removing anything that's not actually true. So the third sign, full moon eclipse, is a good time to reveal the things that you communicate also, not just to others, but to yourself, that are actually out of date, I would say. The third and ninth house eclipses, and all of this emphasis on these houses in your chart in these areas are really emphasizing how are you thinking and how can you maybe think differently and therefore communicate differently, again, to others and to yourself. And so a lot going on here, especially in your ninth house. Now, if you're traveling or planning to travel at this time, it could be quite complicated. I mentioned this in the April forecast. It continues into May, especially until Mercury has station direct by May 15th. But because of the eclipses and Mercury retrograde, despite Jupiter being in your ninth house, despite the sun in your ninth house, all of these are more positive, but just complicated. So as long as you're willing to put up with complications, and if you are traveling and or studying, and you know that there's going to be some hiccups and delays and all of that, you can, deal with any kind of frustration that might come about. Now, when then Mars moves into your 12th sign by the 10th of May, this could be a bit more complicated for you to deal with these frustrations, because Mars in the 12th is not happy. In the 12th, it's hidden away and wants to sort of be active and out there. But then it's also in Cancer, which is very emotive, very emotional sign. And Mars wants action. It doesn't want to have to think about things or feel things. It wants to just do things. So you might feel like you're getting a bit tetchy and frustrated from the 10th of May with all that's happening. And especially as Mercury continues to retrograde until the 15th, but even after so, because your ninth lord, Aries, Mars is your ninth lord and your fourth lord, it's a very important planet for you. It's very much to do with your home life and travel plans, as well as your parents, fourth and ninth. In your 12th, there could be some frustrating dynamics going on here, dealing with them, dealing with any kind of home situation or travel situation, and situation around the home in terms of what you would like to plan around that. I think it's probably a better time to have a bit of a break, have a bit of a downtime, have a holiday. Again, maybe more so after the Mercury stations direct on May 15th. But whatever you do, whatever you actually end up doing, it's more important to be mindful of these kind of transits when they kind of take hold. Now, Mars in the 12th is not at all an obvious one, and which is why it creates problems in the first place. I call it the shoot yourself in the foot kind of transit. So Mars in the 12th, but especially for Leo, is that kind of just vague sense of annoyance that you're maybe not even putting your finger on. Like, why do I even know why I'm annoyed here at whoever? It might not be your parents. It might be some home situation you're annoyed with, or some travel situation, or whatever it is, studying and all of that. Study could be one as well. But whatever it is, just try and take a step back from it at this point, I would say, from mid-May. By the 15th of May, then, like I said, Mercury was stationed. So at least you can start to move forward with plans here. The sun at that point on the 15th, 14th, 15th moves into your 10th sign. And it's a very prominent place to put the sun now for you, Leo, as well. So it creates more prominence in your career life. And because it's moving away from the eclipse now, at least it's not overshadowed by all of those changes and dynamics that you just cannot, fathom. So there's a lot more positivity coming here for your ruler, the sun, in your 10th sign, very prominent, while also hemmed in between Jupiter and Venus, as well as Mercury now direct either side. So there's definitely some potential here for you, Leo, professionally and personally, to move ahead, to plan ahead, to feel good about that as well. Despite the changes that have happened more recently. But again, I would just highlight that sort of like the pebble in your shoe kind of thing, or the bee, on a perfectly good, nice sunny day at a picnic, and that buzzy bee around your head, that's Mars. So just be really mindful of that kind of, irritability that could build here, and find a healthy expression for it if possible. So, Leo, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. Hello, Virgo. This is a forecast for Virgo rising and or moon sign for May 2023. Virgo, your ruler, Mercury, continues to retrograde through your 8th house. The 8th place is all about unexpected change and hidden dynamics. And this is quite complex. It's further complicated because of Mercury exchanging with Mars in the 10th house. Mars is in your 10th house, Gemini. And so there's some changes that are going on here professionally for you, Virgo, that you just are maybe were blindsided by, and that you're having to adjust now into May. And until really Mercury goes forward by May 15th, and Mars at that point will have moved out of the 10th house into your 11th, it could be a frustrating time for you with all of these unexpected changes and frustrations at things not happening as quickly as you would like. Now, every time Mercury goes retrograde for you, Virgo, it is a time of review of what you're doing professionally and every which way, really, a very personal reflection on what you're doing. But when it does it in the 8th sign, because it's so sort of out of your remit, really, it's kind of like something that you cannot see, you didn't predict at all, you couldn't tell that this was going to happen. You didn't even maybe get a sense of it, because the 8th house is very hidden from you. It's a subconscious thing. It could be just a bit uncertain, right? For that reason, more than a bit uncertain. So I would be patient for sure for the first couple of weeks of May around any kind of professional endeavor, Virgo, and wait for this to sort of pan out and, all the dust to settle, because of course we've just had the eclipse in this space as well recently, and we're having another eclipse on the 5th of May. So the eclipse on the 5th of May is in your 2nd sign, balancing out all of those energies of your 8th sign. And this time, I think around the 5th of May, Virgo, this would be really important for you to just sort of stabilize something in your life, to have a sort of sense of stability and some safety and some security and something that is more rooted in what is real. Because the other thing about the 8th house is it's all these changes that are unexpected and all of that, but it's as much about the kind of thinking about changes and not being certain about things and hypothesizing and just not being very clear about things. And so because of that going on at the same time, you need to balance that with just being very clear about things and being very down to earth about things and enjoying things and enjoying people, enjoying good food and social life. And the moon, although an eclipse moon, it's not the ideal day on the 5th of May to actually be very social. I think being very, I would say sensual even on the day might be a better expression, because the senses are the one thing that can really instantly bring you back into the moment and not get you dwelling on all of these unexpected twists and turns and imagining all the other unexpected twists and turns that could happen. It just brings you back to your senses, as it were. So using whatever sense that brings you back into the moment to really ground yourself and stabilize your mind, I would say, around this eclipse. Because if you're overemphasizing the 8th house, which is likely, and you have been for many months now with the North Node here, and especially right now with Mercury retrograde here and the Sun here and Jupiter here and Uranus, there is just so much emphasis going on in the 8th that if you continue to do that continue to feel the uncertainty around changes that are, whether in your life or in the world around you, and you don't balance that with just more, stable things like family and things around you that make you feel secure, you're not living a very balanced life. And Virgo, it's all about balance for you. It's all about finding that, perfect balance in a way. The downside is trying so hard to find that balance that you overdo it, that you try too hard. And so this full moon, though again, a full moon generally would represent this sort of like culmination point and sort of outer expression and a very social time of the month usually. This one is a bit different. This is a bit tricky. So I would definitely take the time out to kind of just be still, to, try and be mindful of these complex things we have to navigate, and for you to navigate them in a way that is just more open to the uncertainty. So Mars then soon after, as just before Mercury stations, we've got Mars at least moving out of this exchange with Mercury, because adding further complexity to all of this, like, is the exchange between Mars and Mercury, your 8th and 10th houses. So there's just a lot of unexpected twists and turns in your work, for example. But then Mars on the 10th of May moves out of the 10th house. So that's more positive and leaves Venus behind here. So professionally, this could lead to a better situation. Venus in the 10th house generally would be a good time to do something that's more purposeful and meaningful to you. And again, tracing it back to that full moon on the 5th of May, maybe thinking about that time to kind of be, aware of that potential. But certainly then by the 10th of May, as Mars moves into Cancer, I would say really invite something new into your professional life, into what you're doing, into maybe shaking it up, even if you are staying in the same job and you're doing the same thing every day, to just maybe approach it differently. Mars then itself going into your 11th house, it's probably a better situation in terms of house position in one way, and no exchange going on with Mercury. But in another way, because it's in Cancer, it could itself get very frustrated, because Mars is not the easiest planet for you, Virgo. Let's face it, it's your 3rd and 8th lord. So you're having to kind of give and take a lot. 3rd house is very much about what you want to take, what you want to achieve, what you want to do. 8th house is about unexpected change that you can't do anything about. And so this kind of give and take, when it goes into the 11th sign, you're having to really be mindful of any kind of group dynamics, any kind of friendship circles, any kind of associations you have with anyone, and any kind of social interaction or group dynamic. You need to be mindful of any kind of frustration that could build in May and in June. So it moves through Cancer from the 10th of May right to the end of June, 30th of June. So just be really mindful of your social interactions, and think about more about the 11th house, about telling you more about what you want to achieve in life, and the friends and groups that you associate with reflect that more so. And if there's something reflected back to you in them, in some sort of group dynamic that shows some frustration, it's really a mirror image to your own frustrated ambitions. So to be mindful of that is to, again, understand this give and take that has to happen, doing what you can while being open to uncertainty. All of that is relevant. Now, by the 15th, though, Mercury will at least move forward. It will station direct on the 15th, and it will start to move forward in your 8th house. And by June, it will move on into your 9th, and a better situation on into your 10th as the summer progresses. So there are at least things kind of clearing up now at this point. And after the end of May, and once we get over this Rahu Jupiter, North Node Jupiter conjunction in your 8th house, which itself, again, unexpected change, but now Rahu Jupiter is like almost shocking changes. Now, what I would say to you is that just be very open to any kind of advice that might be ill-conceived. Whether or not the person is giving that advice in that way deliberately or not, they might not know. And again, they're just reflecting back to you what you don't know. There's this lack of maybe knowing right now. There's lack of clarity, because Jupiter is all about having a clarity. This would tie more so in with your relationships right now. So there's some tricky dynamics to deal with here for your relationships. But on the other side of that, I would also say, try also to be open to some unexpected news that actually is a positive thing. So don't just think of unexpected news and twists and turns as negative, that there could be some positive, unexpected news coming your way. Jupiter generally is said astrologically to represent inheritances and so on in the eighth house. So there could be some sense of boom now in terms of you gaining something from some other source that you haven't directly earned yourself. So, that's one example. But the other side of that, therefore, then is that there has to be some, something that happens for you to gain that, so that's why it's always a mixed bag, the eighth house. But just again, be open to some sort of positive expression of this, and to be open to more intimacy as well, and to be more vulnerable, because essentially that's why the eighth house is about intimacy and vulnerability. If you can't be open to change and being vulnerable and uncertainty, if you can't be okay with being uncertain, then you really cannot be intimate when you think about it. Intimacy is about really being yourself truly, and just expressing all of your feelings about all of everything. So Virgo, I would say that this, though a complex time for you overall, it's a time I think that you can really go and experience some great healing actually at this time more than anything else, because that's ultimately what the eighth house is bringing us towards. And so Jupiter in the eighth house now, after all of the eclipses and the Mercury retrograde and all of these complex things that have to work themselves out in May, Jupiter is going to stay here for a year. So this could be a very positive thing ultimately for you, a great healing for you. So Virgo, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. Hello, Libra. This is a forecast for Libra rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Libra, we have had a solar eclipse, and all of these planets gather in your seventh house of relationship in April. There was the solar eclipse on April 20th, and that culminates in a lunar eclipse in your sign by May 5th. So I'll just show you that first. This is here with the south node of the moon, Ketu, and all of these other planets gathered in your seventh house. So there is obviously the potential here for an imbalance for you, Libra, going on in your relationship space. And at the same time, this time, especially around the 5th of May, is a time to really focus back in on yourself and what you're doing in the world professionally, as well as every other which way, really. And more than anything, with Ketu eclipse, it's about removing anything that is no longer you, and what you're meant to be doing. And therefore, that leads to being clear about what you are meant to be doing. So eclipses usually bring things up to, you can see them, and then especially with the South Node Ketu eclipse, then to remove them, and ultimately to get clear about that. But of course, with all the other planets gathered in your seventh house, including a Mercury retrograde, including the North Node Rahu conjunct, Mercury and Jupiter by the end of May, the sun continuing through your seventh house, Uranus been there for a few years. It's just there's a lot of change that's going on for you and your partner and your relationship between the two of you. And even if you don't have a partner, there's bound to be some, overemphasis on the other. Now, you might say that Libra, you tend to do that anyway, because you are the natural sixth, the natural seventh sign of the zodiac. Libra is all about balancing relationships, bouncing ideas of others and all of that. Because there's just such an overemphasis on the seventh house right now, it's just there's not a lot of clarity, either for your relationship with your partner or for your partner. Mercury continuing to retrograde, Jupiter conjunct the North Node. All of these create a lot of uncertainty and a lack of clarity, I would say. But after the eclipse, at least on the 5th, and then after especially Mercury stations on the 15th, at least things can start to move forward and you can start to plan ahead. The one thing I would say, though, because by the end of May, Jupiter and Rahu come together by exact degree on the 27th. Whatever it is you are planning, just make sure that you're open to being, I wouldn't say like deliberately deceived, but if you're getting advice at this time, people don't necessarily know what is right and what's wrong with Jupiter and Rahu together. So in any engagement with anyone else, your partner or anyone, I would say just be really open in communications and be very patient with, with everyone, including yourself, because it just might not be very clear. And so all of this will, pan out and fizzle out, and don't worry about it. But in May, if you do have to make any important decisions, and if you have to make any important decisions around, your relationship and all of that, just maybe, put it on the back burner for a while, I would say, to kind of get more clarity around it first, because ultimately clarity will be forthcoming as Jupiter settles into your seventh sign, passes the eclipse and all of that. But you can see here by the 15th, as Mercury stations, Jupiter is exactly conjunct the eclipse degree. So there's some things coming to light here that could create some surprises. And, you need to be open to that. And if you're not listening and fully attentive, you could easily miss things. At the same time, Mars moves into Cancer on the 10th of May. So it breaks up this exchange between Mars and Mercury, this, frustrated exchange in many ways, especially the Mercury retrograde until mid-month. But in another way, it's creating a more frustration because Mars in your 10th house, though a strong place for Mars, the 10th house of career, it's Cancer. And Cancer is all very much about emotions and feelings. And that is, or can override what you should be doing. So this again will tie back into your relationship and any kind of relationships actually with your partner or with your family, because that's what Mars is for you. And so any kind of frustration that you're feeling with your family or partner, or any frustrations they feel to you, could really come out at this time. And so being really mindful of doing something with this Mars, because if you're feeling that frustration and you can't express it, it will be reflected back to you through these kinds of relationships, through either, your partner, family, maybe it's the boss, the 10th house. So whoever it is and whoever you're dealing with, I would say from mid-May, just be very mindful of your need to kind of take this Mars energy and be more proactive as opposed to reactive, because you could easily get reactive at this time. But still, thankfully, Mercury's moving forward. Venus is going to be in your 9th sign, a more positive sign for the whole month of May. And so that's more positive even than in April, because April had its own complexity and your ruler Venus was in your 8th house. And now that it's in the 9th house, I think this could be a great time to enjoy travel. After Mercury retrograde, perhaps more so, travel or anything that expands your mind in any way. And so some sort of enjoyable experience that gives you a deeper sense of meaning actually and purpose, and something higher than just frivolous fun, which though Gemini can be, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's also the 9th house for you, Libra. So just having something that's more meaningful and engaging in that way. The sun here in Taurus from mid-month as well, moving from your 7th house, at least moving now away from the eclipses, highlights the 8th house and joint resources and joint values. And so whatever shakeup that's been happening in your relationship, now is the time to reassess and to look at, to highlight your joint values. And joint resources means also maybe joint bank account, all of those things, finances and all of that will be highlighted here. So with the sun in your 8th house, you then have Venus and Jupiter either side of the sun, which is a more beneficial expression, really. So I do think that finances and earnings and all of that can improve. You just have to be open to the unexpected and to think about unexpected as a positive thing, not just something that you wouldn't wish for yourself, but actually that unexpected news could be very unexpected positive news. And so think about that for Sun in Taurus with Venus in your 9th sign. So that's the month of May, Libra. It's definitely a complicated month, and especially in any kind of relationship dynamics. And it could be potentially then furthering into the end of May into June, leading to some frustrations as well in terms of your professional life. But I think if you can really tackle these and be more proactive and be more open to other people while you're being more proactive, a tricky balance to achieve for sure. But if there's any sign that can do it, Libra, it's you. So anyway, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Scorpio. This is a forecast for Scorpio rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Scorpio, your ruler, Mars, continues through Gemini until the 10th of May, at which point it will move into its sign of debilitation, Cancer. and remain there until the 30th of June. So the rest of May and all of June. Now, this is both good and bad news. And ultimately, even the bad news is good. So let me explain. So when you have Mars in your 8th house, it can be challenging, but it's exchanging with Mercury in your 6th house right now. So that's a double negative. So for you, Scorpio, this transit is actually a more positive thing, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to challenge you, but that the challenge itself you rise to and then improve your life. So this exchange between the 6th and 8th houses, Mercury retrograde here in the 6th, Mars in the 8th, ultimately can improve your health, for example, because if you're working out, for example, that's a very good example of the 6th house, and you're eating well and you're doing all the things you know you need to be doing and you're cutting out the things you know you shouldn't be doing, then you improve your health. If you're not doing those things, of course, then there's a problem, and that could show a problem. But again, because this transit, this exchange is seen as a double negative, ultimately you will overcome the challenge. And you will, for example, if there was a challenge here with competitors or with co-workers or with employees at 6th house, then there's something to overcome here. But again, you deal with it, you deal with the issues, and then you overcome it. So that's a positive thing. What happens though, therefore, after is that you might burn yourself out, because by the 10th of May, Mars moves into Cancer, where it's not happy in. Now, having said that, again, this is maybe a kind of not a double negative, but not as challenging a situation as you might think, because Mars in its debilitation sign, you think for you that might be not a very good thing. Certainly, I think it's a time to take some time out. The thing is that it's the 9th house. So it's still a sort of more buoyant place in the zodiac anyway, in your horoscope. The 9th house is very much about travel and thinking about things further afield and opening your mind and broadening your mind, essentially. It's just that you have to be really mindful of, if you are traveling or studying or doing anything that's broadening your mind in any which way, be mindful of any frustrations that can build here, and be mindful of your energy in general. Now, this energy advice would be more appropriate for Scorpio rising than moon sign, but it's still relevant for moon sign in terms of, emotional reactivity, for example. Rising sign, again, maybe just take a step back, maybe not push so hard. If you find yourself pushing hard, you maybe just understand where that push is coming from, and that you might be overcompensating for a sense of lack and then overdo it and then create more problems than you actually solve. Mars is a problem solver, and especially for you, Scorpio, because it's the 6th lord. So you're always looking to solve problems. And in the 9th house, the 9th house is more about getting into a flow, and it's not about problems really. It's about good luck, good fortune, and things flowing well. But if you're coming to the table with all of these problems and it's all about flow, and you're trying to, tackle problems while you're flowing, well, I mean, there are ways of expressing that for certain, but you could also make problems where there are no problems. And that's something to be mindful of for the rest of May, after the 10th of May, and for all of June, while Mars moves through your 9th sign. Mercury then continues to retrograde only until the 15th. So 5 days later, Mercury will station. So this is like, at least things are moving forward now. You can start to plan ahead, whatever insights that you've had since the eclipse in your 6th sign in April, and whatever you've been working out. And literally, you might have been working out, doing more workouts. That would be a good expression of the 6th house. Maybe eating better, doing all of these things for the 6th house. Now you can really start to move forward with these plans and sort of add to them and sort of build on what you've already created, or you've got rid of things and now start to implement new things that are more beneficial for your health. While all of this is happening, Venus moves from your 7th sign from the beginning of May, and for most of May moves through your 8th sign. Now, Venus in the 7th house was enjoyable, I'm sure, for you, Scorpio, and it probably made all of that work and all of those things you had to deal with at work, maybe, or with other people, more enjoyable, because Venus makes everything more enjoyable and smooths everything out. Now that Venus in May is moving into your 8th sign, especially until Mercury stations on the 15th, there could be some complexities going on here for sure, in terms of how you're trying to work things out. Some issues around relationships for sure. So you really have to work some things out here and be more communicative with your partner. And if you're not, and you're hiding things from your partner, this could lead to problems. But ultimately, as well, we see here the sun move into your 7th sign from mid-month. The sun, therefore, is in between Venus on the one side and Mercury and Jupiter on the other side. And so actually this is a more beneficial transit for you professionally, I would say, because the sun is your 10th lord in the 7th house, hemmed in, as it were, between these benefics. It's like there's a good situation developing here for you by the latter part of May professionally. Personally, you just need to be mindful of being very clear with your partner, and, you know, being more intimate. That would be a better expression of Venus in the 8th house than hiding things, I would say. And not hiding your frustration either, because again, don't forget Mars in your 9th house. I want to go back because I meant to address the eclipse, because like I said, we've had an eclipse in Aries already in your 6th house. And with so many planets in your 6th house, this eclipse is important to find more balance on the 5th of May. So it's a full moon, partial lunar eclipse in your 12th house. The South Node, your other ruler, apart from Mars, is in your 12th house. So here there's a need to sort of let go a bit more and to try not to figure it all out and try not to, yes, you need to work hard on something here, that this is a time to actually figure things out and to improve your life. All of that's good. But if you overdo that, then you're not living a very balanced life. So this full moon is going to come around on the 5th of May and remind you of that, remind you to take time out and to have some rest and to just let go for a while and just not to try and figure it all out. And especially because Mercury is still retrograde at the time until 15th of May, the full moon on the 5th of May is a time to really just, be patient with it all. It will all work out. It will all fizzle out and you'll be more clear about things ultimately. And ultimately, after all of this, after all the eclipses and the Mercury retrogrades and all of that, and even after the end of May with Jupiter and Rahu come together by exact degree on the 27th of May, it might not be clear right away, but clarity is going to come, right? Rahu and Jupiter, especially together at the same degree, could show that there's not a lot of clarity around some issue, and you might feel like, okay, and because this is a square to Mars as well, you might feel a bit frustrated around these kind of issues right now. But clarity will be forthcoming eventually, because Jupiter will remain in Aries for the year, will move beyond the eclipse, the shadow, and that uncertainty. And so connecting more deeply as well with, your day-to-day life, I would say, and what you're doing, and try not to kind of get lost in what, this, that, and the other, like what could be or what should be or whatever. It's just getting on with what you're doing day to day, I think, would be a better expression of all of these transits ultimately, including the Jupiter. So Scorpio, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Sagittarius. This is a forecast for Sagittarius rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Sagittarius, Jupiter, your ruler, has now moved into Aries. And though it's still combust, it's still not visible. It's hidden behind the sun. It is starting to emerge in May. And when it does emerge in May, it means that you can see more clearly. Now, having said that, it still has to meet with Rahu, the North Node, by the end of May. So May is a sort of mixed bag in a way. It's a complicated month for sure. It's complicated for everybody. But in relation to the Jupiterian themes, Jupiter all about clarity and the 5th house all about planning the future. There might not be a lot of clarity in May, but there might be many instances of like light bulb moments as well, because that's the two sides of the eclipse, the Rahu-Jupiter conjunction. Rahu-Jupiter can show like this kind of almost hyper sort of focus in a way, hyper, I would say even like hyper intuition. That's what I call it. It's like intuition on steroids, Jupiter Rahu. But at the same time, as Rahu is so extreme, it always shows the other side of things, where it's like this gut sense, but actually it's a gut sense that it's not based on anything real, and actually can really lead you astray. And that could be reflected in someone also leading you astray. So Jupiter Rahu coming together by the end of May, the 27th of May to be exact, is a transit that is in the 5th house, especially a time to be really mindful of any kind of advice you're getting. Now, this is especially around children, around finances, in terms of speculating with the markets and things like this, around future plans, any kind of thing that you're planning at all for your future or for your children's future is not very clear right now, but it will become clear as Jupiter settles into your 5th house and passes the shadow of the eclipse and will be there for another year until May next year, 2024. So don't worry about it. May this year is a bit complicated, but afterwards things will become more clear and you can start planning ahead with more clarity, and not just clarity, but more optimism and buoyancy, I would say. Yet still, May 2023, there's a lot of complexity, like I said, including the Mercury retrograde ongoing until May 15th and its exchange with Mars in your 7th house. Now, although this is seen as a beneficial exchange that's going on for you, Sagittarius, the 5th and 7th lords exchanging. So 5th and 7th is very much now about children and relationships, and also creative expression, self-expression, and also how you can apply that in your relationships as well as business relationships. So this could be a very beneficial exchange, in other words, and a creative back and forth between you, your children, and or your business relations or your romantic relations. So ultimately, that's all really good, except again for the fact that Mercury is retrograde and there's some delay, there's some hesitation perhaps on someone's part, and it's not a lot of clarity again forthcoming because of Jupiter and what it's doing. So the first part of May, especially because Mercury continues to retrograde until the 15th of May. But let me show you, first of all, the 5th of May. So the 15th of May is when Mercury stations. 5th of May is the eclipse opposite. So we've had an eclipse already in your 5th house. So that might have instigated something. There might be something new coming into your life. It's something more positive. Again, it's kind of mixed with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of lack of clarity for sure. But it certainly could be something more positive. Opposite now, we have the moon in your 11th house, and it's asking you to find balance and resolution in terms of these new plans. The 5th and 11th houses are both very much about the future planning and all of that, but they both are two sides of the same coin in one way. But the one side is about your children and your plans, your personal plans, and what you would love to do and who you would love to do it with. The 11th sign is more about how you engage with a larger group in a group context, or even in society, in your community. So how do you find balance there for this eclipse is important, that you have goals also in life and ambitions, which is what groups of people and friendships and friend circles reflect back to you. But you also need to find a balance between what you love to do, what you would love to do, and what other people want from you. And so in a way, the South Node Ketu, an eclipse here in your 11th sign, is asking for you to let go of certain people, maybe, or certain dynamics with people, or certain aspirations or ambitions around some things, to get really clear about what isn't for you anymore and get clear about what is for you, and to focus on those things and making those things a priority now. And finding a balance between both of them means being very clear about what you have to bring to the table, what you would love to do, but how other people can help as well. It's like that saying, getting by with a little help from your friends. This is important, that you don't neglect your friendships, you don't neglect your social circle, because they have an important part to play in all of this, in getting what you want, I mean. So that is the eclipse on the 5th of May. The 15th of May, as I mentioned, Mercury stations, at which point Mars will have moved into Cancer. So this exchange breaks up on the 10th of May. And then on the 15th of May, Mercury will station. So this Mercury-Mars exchange, they do move into a square to each other now. That's a whole other. But Mars is now moving out of your relationship zone. And although, again, that negotiation was beneficial ultimately, it's now moving into your 8th sign, into Cancer. And so there could be some frustrations that are bubbling underneath the surface, Sagittarius, that you're not initially aware of. And it's important to be aware of them, of course, because if you're dealing with any kind of, dynamics, very tricky dynamics, especially with your partner or with others in general, any kind of issues around resource, any kind of issues around money, any kind of intimacy issues, any kind of just bubbling under sort of frustrations, need to be dealt with pretty quickly, nipped in the bud, as it were, before they build to kind of a situation where you're attracting any kind of responses from other people, though unconscious, that create this kind of argumentative stance. So Mars in Cancer is more emotive and reactive, and not as proactive as it would like to be. It would really like to be proactive, but in Cancer, it really has to deal with a lot of emotional issues. And whether it's with your partner again or with any other, it's something to be mindful of, not just in May, but actually throughout June as well. It will stay here until the end of June. And because it's doing it opposite Pluto, it's adding in all of these kind of interesting sort of power dynamics as well, in terms of your family and your partner's family, perhaps, or your money and your partner's money, or money in general, or security versus insecurity, certainty versus uncertainty. This kind of power play, this need to control things that are not controllable many times. And when is it, good to make things happen and control things? And when is it good to just let it go and just be open to the uncertainty? Oftentimes we're just not comfortable with uncertainty, and we'll grab onto anything just to have a sense of certainty. And so it's really important to be mindful of when we do that, because we don't just want to grab onto anything or anyone just to have a sense of certainty. So apart from that, though, I think it's a good time in May to experience a sense of doing something you love to do, to plan something, especially after Mercury's station by mid-May. The sun then by mid-May also moves into your 6th house, and hemmed in between Venus in your 7th house and Jupiter in your 5th. And so these are definitely enjoyable transits, I would say. And Venus in your 7th alone is a more enjoyable time with your relationship. Again, if you just acknowledge the kind of underlying maybe frustration, whatever that might be, bubbling up under the surface. But ultimately, I think there can be very many enjoyable engagements going on here in May, and definitely time to make full use of them. The sun, which rules your 9th house of travel, for example, or study, hemmed in between Venus and Jupiter, can be a very positive thing in the 6th house even. And even though the 6th house is all about, having to work at something and work towards something and maybe get bogged down in something, it's a good time, I think, to just be enjoying that process, I would say, Sagittarius. So I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. Hello, Capricorn. This is a forecast for Capricorn rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Capricorn, your ruling planet Saturn is moving through Aquarius. It continues its transit through your 2nd sign of family, of finances, of values, of vision and speech. And so vision, not just outer vision, but inner vision and insight. And so this could be a great time for you to really think long and hard about what's important to you. What vision do you hold about what you want? What do you value in life? And who do you value? So family dynamics, of course, are going to be an important one here, as well as finances. And so that's a longer term transit. It's another 2 years. So it's going to be an ongoing theme in your life for many years. Pluto continues through your sign, and it actually stations on the 1st of May and starts to slowly backtrack in your sign. And so while you're going through that process of, figuring out what's important to you and who's important to you, you're also going through a very personal change and transformation in a very deep inner way with Pluto that you might not be conscious of doing. But of course, Pluto represents the kind of change that happens very slowly inwardly, especially while retrograde, that you might not be aware of even. It's like when something's happening in a person's life, or I should say, doesn't seem to be happening in a person's life, and yet still there's some deep inner change that's happening while they don't seem to be doing anything. That's a Pluto transit. So to think about that, Capricorn, I think it's an important time to think about the inner changes that you're going through, the shifts that you're going to be going through for many years, of course, with Pluto in your sign for the next 20 years, nearly until 2040. So in this time period, though, with Saturn in your 2nd house, thinking about how that impacts, your vision and your ability to plan ahead as well. The 2nd sign is very much about that, and thinking about planning the future, not a lot of astrologers think about the 2nd sign in that way, but it's very much about future planning in many ways. And again, you need a vision for that. So focusing, that's another thing about Saturn in the 2nd, is like focusing your vision on something, your inner vision on something to plan it. So apart from that, though, there's a lot going on in your 4th house in the home. A lot of change, a lot of upheaval, most likely, a lot of challenge potentially. And that is because of all these planets in your 4th house, with including Mercury retrograde and exchanging with Mars in your 6th. So when there's ever an exchange between the 4th house of home and happiness and the 6th house of challenge and obstacle and competition, or some issue that has to be dealt with, then there's a challenge to be met here and some change that has to occur with an eclipse and Mercury retrograde and the exchange with Mars in your home life. And of course, the change might have already happened, or it might have felt like it's already happened. Like oftentimes with eclipses, it's like an inner change anyway. It's a psychological change that happens. That's the eclipse. But then there's the Mercury retrograde, which is this kind of reviewing and reassessing the whole change that's happened already, perhaps, if indeed it has happened. It very much depends on the individual chart, of course, when the changes happen in a person's chart. Where the exact degree is of the eclipse and how that's impacting the exact degree of your ascendant, for example, or any planets you have in the fourth house. Whatever it might be, whether it's before or after the eclipse, there's changes happening here. And because there's so many planets in your fourth house, including now Jupiter, as the sun also moves through this month, so much emphasis and maybe overemphasizing and not emphasizing others and other things. And the other thing is, of course, opposite in the 10th house. So if you're overly focusing on home and happiness and what would make me happy, you might not be focused on work. So work, and maybe you shouldn't be. I'm not saying you should, but certainly all of the signs can become imbalanced and even polarized when the nodes get involved. So when you have the North node, there's a tendency for us to overemphasize that and maybe even obsess about that thing. And in your case, Capricorn, again, it's home. And then with the South node, there can be a tendency to neglect that thing. If you're obsessing about something else, obviously, then you're neglecting something else. And so the other thing about that is when we're compulsive about anything with the North node, and in your case, in the home dynamic, then you can be very impulsive about the opposite. Because if you're just overly thinking about something and very constricted about one area of your life, it almost gets squeezed out in some other way. So Ketu then can become more extreme and impulsive in another way. And this full moon Ketu eclipse on the 5th of May could certainly be impulsive because it's in your 10th house of action. So that is related more to work and profession and all that, but it could be anything you're doing. And so just be mindful of what you're doing now at this time and making sure that it's not a reaction to all of this kind of overthinking things in your home situation, and that you find a balance between home and work life, and the life balance, basically work-life balance. So that's the full moon and lunar eclipse on the 5th of May. The next big change to happen then is that Mercury will station on the 15th after Mars moves into Cancer on the 10th. So I'll just show you those here. So Mars moving into Cancer on the 10th of May into your 7th sign. Out of this exchange between the 4th and 6th, that's definitely positive for sure. Venus then moves into your 6th sign with Mars into your 7th sign. That's not as easy in another way. So although this exchange of Mercury and Mars is broken up now by the 10th of May, that's most certainly positive. Venus moving into your 6th sign for the month of May with Mars moving into your 7th sign, they're not suited to those signs generally. It doesn't mean you can't make it work, and I'm sure you'll make it work, but as long as you're aware of the pitfalls of these, and I'll mention them, then you don't have to experience them as in any way too challenging. Venus doesn't like in the 6th house because Venus is about love and harmony and relationship, and 6th house is about work and working things out and problems. And, unless you can enjoy working things out and the problems that you're having to solve at this point, then it just could be a bit sort of humdrum and sort of getting bogged down in too much detail and, red tape and all of that. So that's why Venus doesn't like it in the 6th house. But again, you can make it work for you. You can enjoy the process. Mars doesn't like it in the 7th house because Mars is all about what I just mentioned that Venus is having to do and not about relationship. Mars is about working out things. Mars is about challenge. Mars is about taking on a challenge and wanting to do it. In the 7th house, it's placing that in the relationship space, and then it's therefore creating issues with relationships. So making sure that you don't get too hot and heavy with people, that you don't burn your bridges, as it were, that you think about things before you say things, that you make sure that you keep any kind of frustration in check, that you don't let it to boil over, that if you feel it simmering under the surface, that you find healthy outlets for it, that you don't become too reactive. That's certainly a possibility with Mars in Cancer. And instead try and be more proactive with other people and be more direct without again, burning bridges or cutting their feet from underneath them, pulling the rug from underneath them, as the saying goes, right? So you don't want to be too aggressive in how you engage with people, but again, you don't want to be too meek and pulling back and avoiding things either, because Mars in Cancer can go either way many times. So Capricorn, I mean, obviously a lot of these transits are very much to do with your personal life, your home life, your relationships, and all of that. The sun moves into your fifth sign, very much about children or creative self-expression as well. And though it is a good placement for the sun and it's hemmed in between Jupiter and Venus, so another good indication here. The Mars in the seventh and Venus in the sixth could, spoil what would otherwise be a lovely interaction by just focusing too much on problems and just engaging in some sort of aggressive way. And you might not acknowledge that it's aggressive in any way on your part, but if it's in you, then it could also be expressed by them. It's almost like through you, from them back to you. So anyway, just something to be mindful of by the end of May, especially the mid to end of May. So Capricorn, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. Hello, Aquarius. This is a forecast for Aquarius rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Aquarius, Saturn continues to move through your sign. This is Saturn coming home. And, obviously Saturn in your first sign is impressing itself upon you in a way that might be a very positive thing ultimately, but it also might be initially a very sort of grounding thing where you have to sort of come down to earth. That is ultimately a positive thing, but if you are high up in the sky, high up in the clouds, kind of thinking about some things that are way too idealistic, Saturn comes around and kind of says, okay, you need to bring this down to earth and make this happen. And again, ultimately, that's a positive thing because you can start to make things happen. So Aquarius, you probably get a sense of things are starting to happen. In other words, with Saturn moving through your sign. The other ruler that you have is Rahu, the north node of the moon, and that is in your third sign where Saturn is aspecting or looking towards. And so there's so much emphasis on your third sign now. There's eclipse in your third sign in April. We have now Mercury retrograde in your third sign. We have Jupiter having moved in. The sun is there. Uranus continues there, has been there since 2016. A lot of emphasis on your third sign. It's about creative self-expression in one way, but it's also about expression in every which way. So back and forth, speaking and listening, communicating, emailing, thinking about all of these things, but also thinking about going for something that you want. How do you achieve what you want? How do you communicate what you want? And first of all, what is it you want? That's important. You need to know what you want. So being clear about what you want is one of the key things. And because Mercury in this third sign, though retrograde, creates complexity for sure, maybe not being very clear and having to kind of think twice about that. Its exchange with Mars in your fifth sign can be a very beneficial thing ultimately. It might challenge you to step up and be clear about it, to be clear about your self-expression, whatever which way. But the challenge itself could add to some sort of creative outlet, so there could be some interesting dynamics going on in how you're communicating with other people and just, again, how you're communicating what you want. If you're in any way creative, obviously these transits are conducive to that. But even if you're not, if you don't call yourself a creative, it's about thinking creatively about things, about your life, and about planning as well. Now, Mercury retrograde is not obviously the best time to actually, sign on the dotted line, as it were, and all of that and plan ahead that way. But it's certainly time to reassess things and review things. And by the time it stations direct on May 15th, then is the time you can start to plan ahead. The eclipse that has happened here recently, and Mercury retrograde and Jupiter and the North Node meeting in May, there's a lot of lack of clarity, I would say, with Jupiter and Mercury, especially the planets that show making clear decisions about things, being very clear about it. They're not very clear right now, but they will get clear throughout the process. And so May is a time, I suppose, to get clear, even if you're not clear. I want to show you the full moon and lunar eclipse on the 5th, because this is an important point in understanding the dynamic between both nodes. The north node of the moon, your ruler in your third sign, really emphasizing and maybe overemphasizing your own opinion about something and your own expression. And that can be a positive thing. Rahu really loves to be in the third sign. But the downside of that is just overemphasizing it and just not listening to other people, not listening just in general, kind of just getting cues in other ways that help you figure things out. And this is a time, I think, to understand that dynamic around the full moon on May 5th. So the moon is opposite the sun. It's conjoined Ketu, the south node, in your ninth sign, which is very much about advice and listening to some higher advice, whether it's an external advice or within yourself, higher self. And so it's important to be very clear and about that and what you need to listen to and who you shouldn't listen to as well. Because while that's happening, Jupiter is coming together with Rahu, the north node, in your third sign. And they come together exact by May 27th, but it's really something that's building throughout May. And that's what I would say in that terms of not being very clear, and maybe even, again, that being reflected in someone not being clear with you, whether deliberately or not, maybe even deceiving you. Again, whether they don't necessarily do it deliberately, but they could deceive you. And again, that's just a mirror image of your lack of clarity around something. And so being clear, I think, is a challenge in May for sure, but it's a process of getting clear, I would say. And through this process, you will get clear about it and you'll figure all of this out and you'll be able to bring all of those big ideas and ideals down to earth and apply them ultimately. But in May, you're getting there. You're maybe not there yet. So while all of this is happening, Mars then will also go into Cancer a few days after the eclipse. And a few days after that, Mercury will station. So let me bring it back to your sign here so you can see that it's Aquarius rising. So on the 15th, then Mercury will station. So these are two important shifts that are happening. The sun will have moved into Taurus as well, your fourth sign at that time, away from the eclipse. So this is emphasizing obviously a very personal, very private, very inner world kind of significations in your chart. You know, what you want, what you're going for, what will make you happy, your creative expression, all of those things. Mars in your sixth sign in Cancer is in one way well placed and in another way not. And this is the case for all signs. It's kind of like a mixed bag because from the 10th of May with Mars in Cancer, it's in your sixth sign, which it likes to be in, and it likes to solve problems in the sixth house. And so it's a good time for solving problems for the end of May and all of June as it transits through Cancer. The issue is with Cancer is that there are a lot of emotional things that could get in the way of you doing what you know you need to do or cutting out what you know you need to cut out, what you shouldn't do. Cancer is more emotional, emotive, and reactive. And so you might react in a strong way that, oh, I know I should do this, but I really don't feel like it, or whatever it might be. And so it's important to find a balance here as well. Like you have to consider your feelings, but at the same time, you have to do what you have to do. And that's how you're going to have to negotiate with this Mars in the sixth. Venus, though, in the fifth is a very pleasant transit, just as it were in your fourth. But now Venus moves into your fifth and Sun into your fourth. It really emphasizes home life, making some future plans here around your home life. I think could be very positive at this time in May. With the Sun in your fourth and Venus on one side and Jupiter on the other, I think this could be a time in May to really make some future plans around home. And to anticipate some very positive outcomes from those plans, I would say. So all of that's very positive, ultimately. And Mercury at this stage, of course, by the 15th, will have started to move forward. And so making plans will be easier anyway. You'll feel that kind of excitement and anticipation build. And the only last thing to talk about is this conjunction between your ruler, Rahu, and Jupiter in your third sign, exact by the 27th of May. Now, this is complicated because, again, you might just be getting advice or you might go on something someone says that they weren't even clear about it, but you thought they were and then they weren't, or you're not clear about something or whatever it might be. Just in terms of, and especially financial concerns, I would say at this time to be very mindful of, you know, again, if you're planning any kind of future endeavor right now or anything around the home, for example, or planning a holiday, for example, that'd be a good example of Sun in the fourth house with Venus in the fifth. You know, if you're planning anything, just make sure that you're very clear about all the details and clear about what you want and what is the right thing to do. And, you know, just be open-minded about it is what I would say. So Aquarius, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead and until next time. Hello, Pisces. This is a forecast for Pisces rising and or moon sign for May 2023. So Pisces, your ruler Jupiter has moved into your second sign now. It's settling into Aries. And although that's probably the last word I would use for May, i.e. settled, I think that things will settle down after this. So May is a very complicated time for sure, with the eclipses, with Mercury retrograde, with Jupiter, reappearing in our sky, and then, meeting with the North Node Rahu. It's kind of like, okay, there's Jupiter, and then all of a sudden then it meets with Rahu. And so there's something coming to light, but then also something obscured. And so there's not a lot of clarity in May. But at the same time, May is a time to get clear. So you get clear because you're unclear. And that is always the case. But in May is that it seems to be that kind of time. Now, there are a lot of more positive things going on as well in May, but this is one of the overarching themes of May, I would say. So for you, Pisces, getting clear because you're not clear. Second sign is very much about being clear. It's about vision, and it's not just outer vision, it's inner vision, like having this insight and vision and planning your future. So anything that you're planning around your vision, your home life in terms of your home life, but also your family life, your finances, your values, what is important to you, and what you want to plan going forward is important to get clear on. But again, it just might not be clear from the get-go. That's because of the Mercury retrograde, as well as the eclipse that just happened here, and the Jupiter conjoining the eclipse by the end of May. Sun moves through here for the first couple of weeks of May, and then moves on into your third sign. And Venus will move on for the whole of May into your fourth sign, with Mars also then moving on to your fifth sign. So we'll talk about these. So here we first of all can go to the full moon on the 5th of May. And this is where we can then think about balancing out all of the indications of the eclipse that just occurred in your second. So the second sign is very much, like I said, about values. It's also about wealth and finances and all of that, resources, family dynamics and all of that. But it's all about things that make you feel safe, essentially. And that vision as well of putting something in place for your future and all of that, financial future and all of that is second sign. The eighth sign is about being open to the unexpected. And for that not to be a bad thing, for that actually to be a positive thing, you also have to just embrace uncertainty. Because obviously, if we don't embrace uncertainty, we just kind of grab onto anything for a sense of certainty that we maybe shouldn't grab onto. So the eighth sign is also about, opening up to unexpected events and uncertainty in a way that's more positive. And even things that aren't, we would label positive, we need to also be open to the unexpected, that changes happen in life, then we can't control everything. Because the thing is, it's emphasizing the overemphasis on the second sign, on wealth and value and family and your own sense of security. And it's just not emphasizing enough this sort of other side of the spectrum, which is, again, being open to uncertainty, going through some process or dealing with some trauma or dealing with something that is maybe making you feel uncertain or just uncomfortable. Again, overemphasizing the comfort side of things. And sometimes we need to feel uncomfortable. Sometimes we need to push ourselves out of our comfort zone in order for us to progress. So this full moon is reminding us that, or reminding you, especially Pisces, that on the 5th of May. So it's the time to maybe, overcome some trauma, I would say, overcome some issue, overcome some challenge, overcome the uncertainty. So that's the 5th of May eclipse, again, balancing out the eclipse that's already occurred in April. And after the eclipse, I think things will start to settle down energetically. And then certainly by the 15th of May, then things can really start to move forward because Mercury will station direct. And before then, a few days before, on the 10th of May, Mars will move into Cancer. So it ends this exchange between itself and so the second sign and the fourth sign exchange, though it's seen as a positive thing, this Mercury-Mars exchange for you, there still is an exchange that has to happen. There's a negotiation that has to happen in terms of family and home life, for example, or finances and home and all of that. So you're obviously working some things out here, Pisces, whether it's financially about the home or family in the home, whatever it might be, you're working some things out. After that 10th of May period, when Mars moves into Cancer, it's about planning ahead now. And with Mars now in a square to Mercury and all the planets here left in Aries, once the sun moves on, then you're obviously wanting to look at your plans and sort of start to implement them. And it's kind of like turn the corner in a way. And that's another thing you could say about a square. It's about planning ahead now. And that's what both the second and fifth sign are about. And so the only downside of this, I would say, is that Mars and the fifth and Cancer more especially can show this sort of reactionary planning. So the best way to approach it is to observe any kind of sense of overreactivity to any kind of perceived threats is one thing to be mindful of. Any kind of overreactivity or power struggles, especially with Mars opposite Pluto at this time. Any kind of dynamics going on in your family, especially with your children, more especially, but any kind of family dynamics at all, and any kind of power struggles that might go on at this time, to be really mindful and cognizant of the kind of underlying this brewing sort of volatility, that you need to find a way to express it, to get it out. Your children might be expressing it more obviously around you if you have them, or people around you, your family around you might be expressing it, but it's really mirroring your own inner angst, I would say, that needs an outlet. That, you know, if you get it out, then you don't have to blurt it out. And that's the thing with Mars with you always, Pisces. And because you're Pisces and because you're one of the more gentle signs and you don't like to offend and you consider everybody and you're so empathic, Mars still is your second lord. And so you really do need to speak your truth here. But again, as long as it's not reactive and it's more proactive, I would say. So at this point, like I said, Mercury is now also stationing moving forward. So this, again, this planning ahead, and this can take a more deliberate route now, you might say. There are some twists and turns to negotiate, of course, still, because especially by the end of the month, but really we're feeling it all month. We're having this conjunction between your ruler, Jupiter, and Rahu. That's on the 27th. Now, this is quite complicated because Jupiter and Rahu, when they get together, it happens every few years. It's not that unusual, but when they do it, they shake things up when they get together. Jupiter, which ordinarily would bring clarity and lack, or when there's a confusion around the eclipses, especially, Jupiter brings the clarity. But when Jupiter conjoins the eclipse itself, and it does it really throughout May, Jupiter itself doesn't feel clear. And so you might not feel clear, in other words, Pisces, about who you are, what you're doing. First, 10th Lord in the second house, you might not be clear about what you're doing. It might be just a kind of blip in that vision that you have. So it's really important to be mindful of keeping that vision strong, but also be mindful of when, that inner instinct, that gut instinct, can sometimes actually lead you astray, because this is the two sides of Rahu always. It could be on the one side showing this very strong gut sense of what is right, which could be right, but then it could also be this complete block and obscurity that, just that what you're thinking is just not on, in any way real. That's the other thing about Rahu. It has both extremes going on, Rahu, right? So in terms of family dynamics and finances, especially while Saturn continues to your 12th house aspecting this, you're having to think about like this financial situation, this spending and saving and all of that, and family and sacrifice, and all of these things are important to deal with, but it's just in May, they are just not very clear from the get-go. It's a process of getting clear ultimately, though. But until after May, until Jupiter has moved past this eclipse, the shadow, literally, into June, you just might not be very clear about it right now. And to be okay with that and to be open to that, I would say. The sun moves on into your third sign by mid-May as well. And Venus, like I said, is in your fourth sign. So some enjoyable experiences at home could be there. And then Venus and Jupiter, both either side of the sun in your third, can be a more beneficial transit, even just being, more engaged with other people as well, just kind of engaging more, and all of that can be enjoyable. So there's definitely some more positive transits going on in May, despite the complexity of the eclipses, the Mercury retrograde, and the Jupiter Rahu conjunction. So once you kind of let it all kind of fizzle out, I would say in May, things can come clear, and it's a process of getting clear, that you don't expect everything to be clear from the get-go in May, I would say, Pisces. And that is the case for all of us, for all signs. And for you, Pisces, it's just more so in relation to these very personal inner dynamic, these kind of things, as well as professional. I mean, certainly professional because of Jupiter ruling your 10th house. So Pisces, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time.